that it's all just a little bit of history repeating.
For people who live in a true democracy, all citizens are considered equal under the law. Citizens have the right to vote for people who will protect their interests in government. In this video, we will be examining the Athenian democracy of ancient Greece and how its democracy was vastly different from our own. Our story begins around 8000 BCE with the development of the Greek city-states. Each of these city-states had their own system of government, which we'll examine later in the video. The Greek peninsula is surrounded by water on all sides except one. The land is covered with mountain ranges, hills, and deep valleys. There is very little fresh water and few rivers for transportation and irrigation. However, the Greeks of this area harvested wheat and barley, which are grains that grew well in this region. They also became famous for producing grapes and olive oil. And finally, they raised small livestock such as goat and sheep. Now for Athens itself, with its rocky soil and dry climate, they didn't have the right environment to grow wheat, so they had to import or bring in wheat. However, they exported wine from grapes and oil from olive trees. They also made magnificent pottery. Because of their close proximity to the Mediterranean Sea, the ancient Greeks used ships as a means of transportation, not only for trading goods, but also in times of war. The Athenian democracy began around 507 BCE, and the social structure of Athens was quite rigid. Around 432 BCE, there were around 300,000 people living in Athens. Only 45,000 of those people were considered citizens. To be an Athenian citizen, your mother and father had to be Athenian as well. You also needed to be a free-born male over the age of 18. Most of the citizens were peasants, and some were rich and some were poor. As an Athenian, you could own land and take part in government. But you had responsibilities as well. Your sons would have to be educated, you would have to take part in political life, and there was always the possibility of military service. There was also the Medics. Now, the Medics were free people from other Greek or non-Greek cities. They did not have the right to own land, and they had to have an Athenian agree to sponsor them. These people were often merchants or craft people. Some were quite wealthy. They also had rights. They had the right to make money and wealth in Athens, but they had to pay taxes, serve in the army, and take part in religious celebrations as well. The final group we'll be looking at is the slaves. These people were usually prisoners of war, and often foreigners who were captured and sold by pirates. They weren't even seen as people, but rather as goods or objects to be traded. They had no rights whatsoever. If they had children, they also automatically became slaves, and all slaves had to obey their masters. Women had a very different role than men and were essential to Athenian society. It was women who passed on citizenship to their sons. They lived in the gymnasium, an apartment inside the Greek home that was specifically reserved for women. The women also weaved and took care of the children. Wealthier women gave orders to slaves who did chores around the house, and poor women worked as nannies, laborers, or prostitutes. Education for boys and girls was also quite different. Young boys stayed with their mothers until the age of 7, and from 8 to 14, an educator taught them reading, writing, music, and math. They also took part in physical education, such as wrestling and gymnastics. From 15 to 17, they trained in different sports and learned reasoning to better form and understand ideas. Because they were going to take part in the political life, they also learned public speaking and arguing. And by the time they were 20, most sons had completed their military service and had become full citizens. School for girls was different. They learned to accomplish household tasks and helped educate the younger children. They stayed with their mother until their wedding, which was usually around age 15, and often married a man who was older than 30. The man that they married was chosen by the young girl's father. Before Athens became a democracy, it was ruled by kings. It was like that until the 7th century, when it became an oligarchy, which is when a few people, usually wealthy, make all the rules. At this time, there were no written laws in Athens. In the 6th century, a man named Pisistratus assumed power by force and with the help of the army. This was a period of tyranny. In the 6th century, as a way of ensuring justice for all, a rich Athenian named Solon proposed laws that helped the poor citizens and put the city itself above the desires of the wealthy. Then in 507 BCE, a man named Cleisthenes brought an end to the tyranny using Solon's laws and created the Athenian Democracy, which literally translates to power to the people. Athenian democratic life truly changed with Pericles. He was a political figure who was elected 14 times in a row. It was his idea to grant an allowance to poor Athenian citizens so that they could take part in politics, even if they didn't have the money or time to take off work. He also started major building projects such as the Parthenon, a place where Athenians would be able to worship the goddess Athena. The political institutions of Athens were very important to the running of the city. The ecclesia included all citizens, but only needed a minimum of 6,000 to begin debates. The ecclesia was able to vote on laws, public expenses, wars, peace treaties, and the election of the strategoi, or the strategists. The strategoi were 10 citizens who were chosen to be military leaders by the ecclesia, and they could only serve one term in office. This was done in order to avoid corruption. Then there was the Boule, or the Council of 500. They had to prepare laws and proposals for the ecclesia to vote on. There was also the Haleia, which was made up of 6,000 citizens, and they were the popular court. Finally, there were the archons who presided over the court and organized religious celebrations. Public activities took place in 5 main places within the city. The ecclesia met on the Pnyx Hill, the Boule, Haleia, and Strategoi met at the Agora, and the archons at the Areopagus. Political activities were at the Kerameikos, and the Acropolis was the center of religious life. While the Athenian democracy allowed all citizens regardless of wealth to participate, women, medics, and slaves were excluded from taking part in politics. The other issue was participation. People who worked or owned small farms found it difficult to meet every 10 days at the ecclesia. Pericles did give the allowance to take a break from work, but the allowance did not apply to the ecclesia. While the Athenian democracy was in no way perfect, we can still see elements of their ideals today. The big difference was they were a direct democracy, where here we have a representative democracy. Today we have voting, jury duty, public debates of our political figures, and much more. I hope you guys found this video helpful. Take care, and don't forget to be awesome.